Well, hello. Welcome back, everybody. So, my friend Kevin always has really cool projects and things like that going on. He called me up and said, hey, I need to build a shed. He's thinking about doing a pool sometime soon and wanted a place that could possibly become his pool storage house, or maybe just a place for his cats to go hang out in there if they're gone for the day. And, so we want to put like a little pet access door on the side. So it'll have some nice little custom features. He also wants to go cedar with it, so that'll be something different for me. I've never actually used cedar for siding, so I think it's going to look really nice. Let's jump right into it. So first off, we found some pictures online of a similar shed that he was going for, and we decided to go with this one-way slant design where the roof is actually going to start at its high point near the fence and slant downward towards the front doors. Now, they had a really small older shed that was sitting there before. It's just a little plastic, I believe like a Rubbermaid thing or something. And once they got that moved, we had a blank canvas to start with. Now, there wasn't a whole lot of dirt work involved. I basically used, shovels and things to level the dirt a little bit where the pad was going to be. I also dig about a 1 foot to 14 inch deep footing around the perimeter just to make sure that we get a nice, structural concrete slab. I'm not one to try and save a couple bucks just to make a really rinky-dink. I mean, for me, foundation is everything. Anytime I build something, if I can add some extra footings and extra rebar in places where I feel like it's really going to strengthen it up, even if I spend some extra money, I feel like it's totally worth it, because you can always build on top of a good foundation. If your foundation is crappy, well then you might as well just bust it out and start over. Now, the light colored gravel you're going to see is basically just road base. I go to the local stone supplier and pick up a small truckload of it whenever I need some. And I just spread it down, try to get it to cover a little bit. It's really nice because it gives the concrete something to sit on, and it locks, things together. Once it gets kind of wet, it's not near as hard as concrete, but road base dries, good and tight together, and you get it all packed. And if you don't have a really rainy area where you live, you could build a decent little driveway out of some road base, but the only downside is if it rains really hard, it's going to turn to mud. So you're always going to want to put some kind of rock or gravel over it. Just a little bit of driveway knowledge for you there. Now, I built my rebar grid before I put down the road base, but it was small enough where I was able to just pull the grid out so I could spread the base around evenly and get it ready for the concrete. So once the road base was down, I just lifted the grid back up and put the rebar back in, and we were pretty much ready to go. Now, to someone who has never done any kind of concrete work before, I would tell you it is a royal pain. So be careful what you get yourself into and start with a super small project. I mean, if you've never had to mix concrete in a wheelbarrow or some kind of little mixing tub, don't do anything bigger than a project that requires maybe 4 80-pound bags, because you're going to get a reality check and a rude awakening if you try to do 30 or 40 bags your first time around. It'll eat your lunch. Now, I have a nice little concrete mixer that I bought from the tool supply store. It's been one of the best investments I've ever made, because even though I bought it for a specific project, I spent a little over $200 on it, and I knew I was going to use it for more than just that one project, and literally I've used it 100 times since then. Even if it were to break tomorrow, I would go buy another one, just because they're good to have around when you do these kind of projects. So, a mixer is definitely a good way to go if you think that you might do this again. Me personally, I've always enjoyed concrete work in some way. Now, yes, it's very labor intensive, but I think the fact that I can put down a new concrete slab and have this cool foundation to build on top of, or have a nice little extra patio space, I enjoy being able to do that myself. I think it's very, very rewarding, even though, like I mentioned, the work is very labor intensive. Now what you're going to see here as I finish the slab is I actually installed J-bolts, which you can buy at your local hardware store. I install them after I get the concrete pretty smoothed out, and then I go back and re-smooth around the bolts. And what that does is it allows those to be permanently planted in the concrete. So when you get ready to start your framing, you've got something to bolt down to instead of using like a ram set gun or trying to use, you know, the concrete screws, which I feel like don't always have the best results. If you get the right ones, and then I also saw on construction sites at one time there's a system you can get where you're going to be driving a bolt into the concrete. You know, you pre-drill a hole, but there's also what I believe was like a 2-part epoxy or some kind of a resin that they were mixing to put on these bolts before they went in. It really locks them in there. I don't know much about that system, but for me the J-bolts are always a good way to go. It's a little tricky if your concrete is really thick. If you mix it super thick, it's going to be a little tricky to stab those bolts down in there. But once you get it down to the height you need it and positioned where you need it, I just kind of shake them around so that the concrete will fill in around it, and then if I need a little bit of extra, I can always whip up some to throw in there if it makes a bit of a hole. But usually it's not too bad. Now as I get started with the framing, I'll typically fit my bottom plates on first because I want to know that when I build that wall, that bottom plate is going to go directly on those J-bolts, and I'll be able to bolt it right down without any trouble. Now, yeah, you can build the wall and then you can kind of set it up there and try to drill the holes in the right places and all that. But for me, I just prefer to do it before building the stud wall. So you can see that's what I did here. Once I get those bottom plates to fit, I remove it and then I set it up to put the studs all together and build that wall section. Now the framing isn't too far out of the ordinary for any typical construction project. I was using 2x4s, even though a lot of people use 2x3s for sheds, which is totally fine. I'm just used to working with 2x4s, and I just figured why not grab a little stack of them and go for it. I believe I was using some 1/2-inch OSB for the outer sheeting, and which unfortunately, if you're watching this video in, you know, early 2021, the price of lumber has skyrocketed, so anything you buy right now is going to be expensive. I mean, a sheet of plywood that used to cost me $17 is about $47 now, which is unbelievable. And I think even a $10 sheet of OSB, or it used to be $11 or $12, is probably $30 at least now. So it's a little bit crazy. So yeah, have fun with that if you've got a construction project going on right now. Now as we get into the roof, nothing spectacular here. We went with some brownish colored shingles. I forgot the actual color name, but went with the color that would kind of match the shingles on the house. And it took me about half a day to do the roof. It wasn't too bad. You know, you always put down some tar paper and use those roofing nails with a little plastic thing. And watch some YouTube videos on roofing. They give you some really good like measurements for spacing of your nails and things like that. You'll also see as I'm nailing in the shingles, I'm putting 2 nails that'll kind of straddle the the line that's cut in the shingle. So that's also something to be aware of. And also, you gotta make sure you hit that nail line on your shingles, because that could be the difference between, you know, a heavy wind blowing your shingles off and then your roof actually holding up to a heavy windstorm. So make sure that you do a little bit of research before you just go putting the shingles up. It's always good to watch a few roofing videos if it's your first roof. Now, even though we weren't completely dealing with pandemic prices when I did this project, I did have a little bit of an eye-opener when I bought the first truckload of cedar boards, because I had never used siding and it really came down to the trim. The cedar trim boards were expensive. We were using fence pickets to do the main siding, and I was actually able to find a store that sold them in 8-foot lengths. Since this shed was only 5 feet by 8 feet, I was able to get pieces that took up the whole length to do the back side of the shed and didn't have any seams, which was great. But cedar can be a little bit expensive. And of course, as always, I gotta have my snacks. I probably had sweet tea in that cup, and of course those Reese's sticks, oh my gosh. If Reese's ever wanted to sponsor me, I would promote the heck out of those things. They're literally the best. Now, some say that cedar is really good for protecting against bug infestation and rot. I know there are certain bugs that don't like cedar, but I haven't had a lot of experience with it. I mean, it's super lightweight, and it does tend to split easily in some places, but if you're putting it up when it's brand new, it's pretty easy to work with. And I would say put those screws in a little bit tighter, even though it seems like it's going to go through the board and it's going to split. Cedar is pretty soft. Put them in a little bit tighter, because you don't want your siding boards to loosen up as it kind of sets into the weather and gets a few months of, you know, the elements. Really, couldn't have ended up a little bit further over. Oh well, you gotta get tedious sometimes. There she rolls. Now, if you look kind of closely, you can see the very front of the shed. I put this nice little trapezoid shaped piece in the middle of the cedar. I thought that was really cool. It gave it a nice little detail to look at, instead of just having like a seam in the middle with some caulk, or trying to get one solid board to go all the way across. That was one of those things that I added just because I may have seen it in a picture, or I know I've seen it on houses. Sometimes they do something like that in the brick. So figured I would give that a go, and it came out pretty good. It wasn't too bad. It gave it a nice little bit of character. There's also a lot of hardware included on these doors. When you go to the store, you're going to realize that adds up pretty quick. There was probably $50 just in the hinges, the handles. I think I had a cane bolt on the inside, which I drilled into the concrete. And that's not too big of a deal to install, but a cane bolt, I feel like anytime you're going to have a double door, if you feel like you're only going to open one mostly, you can use the cane bolt on the door that you want to leave closed. That way, you just put a latch on the other door, so you open and close that one from the outside. No biggie. Now, in some of these photos, you're going to start to see the little cat access door on the side. And what I basically did was put a nice little flap with a hinge that you could open, and you could either lock it open or lock it closed down at the bottom. And then I ended up using the cedar siding to decorate it and try to make it blend in. but I still wanted it to have trim around it so that you could tell there was something different there. I thought that was kind of interesting, but it came out pretty good.
There's a kitty door, so they can leave it open when the cat's gonna be going in and out. Let's see, is it gonna fit? I need it to go like up in that little gap. Oh, it looks like it will. What? Oh, that's perfect. Exactly where I need it. These are fun. That's awesome.
Alright, so getting into the finish for this shed, what I did was got a sealant that I could use for outdoor. It was a really close match to the cedar, and I want to say the color was even called cedar tan, but it uses, you know, it's regular tube that you put in a normal caulking gun. I went around and pretty much filled in all the screw holes and most of the seams. Now, I don't do the seams underneath every siding board. I figured you could probably do that if you really wanted to go all out. For me, I felt like it wasn't necessary, but I do fill the seams on the sides of the board. So all the vertical seams where the rain could just run right in there, I do fill those. But the ones where there's an overlap siding and it's underneath, I don't really feel like it's necessary. But you can totally do it if you want to. Once all that's done, we used a Cabot, I believe it was like they say like some kind of an Australian oil, and you can get it at your big box stores. It was called Mahogany Flame, and it's gonna run you about $50 for a gallon can. I think I ended up getting 2 cans for this project. It goes, I feel like it goes a pretty long way. Of course, with cedar, you got to put it on kind of thick. Now, some of the boards I did give a light sanding, just so it wasn't so rough and so hard for me to get them finished. But the good thing is this is a one-step product, so even at $50 for a can, you can put it on and it's pretty much gonna give you the color that you're going for. If they have one of the colors available that you like, you're gonna get that color, and you're also gonna get a good layer of a sealing to keep the moisture out. At first I wasn't sure if it was just a stain or what, but once I started using it, I realized that it does dry with a bit of a barrier. You know, it's an oil, so it dried pretty nice, and I feel like we'll get some good protection from the elements out of it. Now, being that this finish was a little bit of a stain and oil combination, if you've never used it before, it's really thin. So you're going to want to use a good brush that'll hold a lot of material to kind of get you going. Now, if you're going to do a second coat, typically the second coat goes on a lot easier, because that first coat's where you're really trying to fill in all the pores of the wood and get things covered. After you achieve that coverage, it's not too bad to go back and throw on a little bit more. You'll notice you use a ton of material on that first coat.
So the shed's almost done. I just have to put the stain around the back wall and the other side wall. But it's looking great so far. There it is.
Now, at some point I went back and installed all the door hardware. Of course, some of it goes on and comes back off during the paint process. That way I can really paint underneath them. I don't like to tape things off when it comes to hardware that you can remove easily. I'd rather just remove it, make sure the paint is nice under there. I feel like it just looks a lot cleaner when you take things apart, put it back together that way after it's refinished. One thing to keep in mind, anytime you're going to add some kind of structure to your property, you always want to factor in a little bit of money and time for finishing it out landscape-wise. And the reason I say that is, you may not realize it, but sometimes you decide to build a shed or whatever, and then when it's all done, it's going to look beautiful and you're going to be really happy with it, but you're going to have a side where there's just not enough dirt. You might have, you know, installed your concrete correctly, you formed it up, got everything level, then you realize that, man, there's just a lot of grade going on here. So I recommended to Kevin that we bring in a little bit of dirt and then lay down some St. Augustine sod grass pieces just to kind of finish this project off really nice, and to keep the new dirt from washing away if we got a big rain. The grass will hold it together really nice. It also made his yard feel finished, and even though he had planned to eventually add a pool, which they just finished, by the way, and it looks amazing. Maybe I can throw in a couple pictures of that. But for the time being, the grass was a nice thing to do, and you know, gave it a nice little finished look, so if they had to go out there after a little rainstorm, they weren't going to be stepping all in the mud and having to deal with the mess there. And as this fun little project comes to an end, you'll see the planter box that we added on the side. That was part of the plan from the beginning. There were just a few details we kind of had to work out. And I wanted to build the shed so that when I built the planter box, I could drive some boards down into the ground and make sure it was going to be nice and solid. And we finished that up, gave it a nice little touch. I hope you guys got some good information out of it. If you're looking to build a shed for your place, maybe you learned a thing or two. Now, if you've seen some of my videos before and you haven't subscribed yet, you might as well go ahead and do it, because you know that you're going to be back. There's a lot of good things that I'm going to share. I've got some really cool projects coming up, including when I built this place pretty much all by myself. I had some help here and there, but we'll get into that. You'll learn all about it. Thank you guys again. I hope to see you on the next one, and be good out there, safe building. See you guys around.
Got all my tools. Yeah. Well, it was nice knowing you, Shed. Peace out.